Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where stupid shit ensues, but yesterday I beat a game, so I kind of wanted to talk about it because it kind of has an interesting history. I dropped it initially, and I picked it back up, and honestly, I kind of regret dropping it the first time around because I really enjoyed it the second time around. But what game am I talking about? The game I beat yesterday was Dusk Diver, specifically the Nintendo Switch version. This game also came out on PC via Steam though, as well as PS4. The game got its initial release in October of 2019 and was developed and published by JFI Games. The game really took me under a week to beat. I put around, I believe, 15 to 20 hours into it. You can go even shorter than that, but that's around the time I put into it. I pretty much did all the side quests and everything. I did not collect all the shards because that would take a lot longer than 20 hours, but like I said initially, I had dropped this game back in January of last year. I put a few hours into it. I ended up dropping it. Not exactly sure why. I just don't think it was what I was looking for at the time. But I did re-pick it up, and the long and short of my opinion is this is a really fun game if you can find it at a discount. It's actually a decent amount of fun. That being said, it is kind of an indie game, so the prices they charge for it, like $40, I wouldn't recommend really. Something around $10 to $20 I think is a lot fairer for this type of game, but it's also worth mentioning, just because I can mention it, that it did actually weirdly get a sequel called Dusk Diver 2. I'll eventually be playing this and talking about this one, but for now I will not be. But it is worth mentioning that weirdly enough, this kind of weird little indie game actually got a sequel to it. I'm not exactly sure who the developer and publishers are. I think Idea Factory, since it suggests Idea Factory was involved, that they probably published it. I don't know if the developer stayed the same though. But getting into Dusk Diver, in terms of the graphics are kind of cool in their aesthetic. Nothing crazy to be honest, but they look decent. I find them enjoyable enough. It kind of goes for a Tokyo Mirage Sessions type of vibe, which I can dig. It has a bit of a cel-shaded style to it as well, which I can also dig. My only real complaint with their graphics is the performance on Switch can sometimes chug a little bit. It's usually during moments of high intensity in combat that it'll start to chug a little bit, but other than that, it does just fine. So in terms of the graphics, they're alright. They do what they're supposed to do, and I enjoy them enough. Now in terms of the soundtrack in this game is actually pretty banger. It does have a bit of a budget sound to it. The game does have a budget, and that kind of leaks into the soundtrack. You can kind of hear like the low budget in the soundtrack, but to be honest, it's actually a pretty decent soundtrack. A lot of bangers, to be honest, for what is otherwise an indie game. There's actually a lot of good tracks in this game that I really enjoyed. These sad tracks I didn't like as much. I thought they were pretty weak, but in terms of like battle themes and like the general walking around and like the convenience store theme, a lot of songs in this game are actually pretty good, and honestly like a lot of them slap pretty hard, like especially some of the dungeon themes. They're pretty hard, to be honest. So this game actually has a pretty decent soundtrack. I would definitely recommend listening to it, just kind of get a vibe of it. Like I said though, the only complaint I really have about the soundtrack is that some of the sad songs or like emotional songs are pretty weak, to be honest. But in terms of the story and characters, the story is 13 chapters long, which sounds pretty long, but the chapters are pretty short. Like I said, I beat this game within the realm of like 20 hours, so really it isn't that long of a game. The story is pretty simple as well. You play as a average high school girl named Yumo who lives in Taipei, Taiwan, which is kind of a cool theme for a game. I've never really seen a game themed in Taiwan, so that's kind of cool. The game specifically has a focus in the district of Ximending. Yumo is just your average high school girl who one day when in Ximending accidentally crosses over into another realm known as Yushanding. Now Yushanding is pretty much like a parallel to Ximending, except it's a lot more hostile with enemies called Chaos Beasts. And so what ends up happening is that Yumo ends up linking up with some guardian gods, as they call them, and gains powers, and she's pretty much fighting to keep the balance of Ximending and Yushanding, so pretty much calamity doesn't ensue the world. It's kind of a simple plot, and honestly it's really easy to follow, and it's nothing crazy, but it's enjoyable enough for what it is. Honestly, I don't mind the fact that the plot isn't like anything crazy deep or complex. Like it's literally just like Yumo gains powers and then she sets out to kind of save the world, or always save Ximending from colliding with Yushanding and having like this calamity occur. It's nothing crazy in terms of a story, but honestly it's still pretty enjoyable nonetheless. In terms of the characters, I played this game entirely dubbed in Japanese. I do not believe there's an English voice acting option. I cannot remember though. If there was, I ended up immediately switching it to Japanese because that's just what I usually do. And the Japanese voice actors do their part, honestly. They're pretty good. Some of the side characters don't really have amazing voice actors, but all the main characters' voice actors do their job for the most part. Now, in terms of the characters themselves, you mainly have 5 main characters. You have Yumo, which is the protagonist, and she's just a goofy goofy high school girl. You have the 3 guardian gods that will kind of accompany you during dungeon crawling, which is Leo, Bahet, and Viana. All 3 characters as well, they're pretty enjoyable, and they're a little group dynamic with the character known as Boss. She doesn't have a name. She's a ceramic bear named Boss. Their dynamic is actually pretty great. The 3 guardian gods that accompany you have all pretty neat personalities, and I enjoy them enough. Boss is a really enjoyable character. Her kind of shady way of running her convenience store and having Yumo do her pretty much dirty work for her is pretty entertaining, and all their interactions between each other are also pretty entertaining as well. You can say that it's tropey, and they kind of do have tropey interactions, but all the characters are pretty enjoyable. They don't really have any sort of growth throughout the story due to the fact that there's just not a lot of time in the chapters for them to really grow as characters. I find it to be fine since it's a relatively short game. They don't have to really have growth, and their characters nonetheless are pretty enjoyable, so I don't really have any complaints on that front. But overall, in terms of the story and characters, the story is pretty simple but still enjoyable, and as well the characters, while they don't have any growth, their interactions with each other and their personalities are still pretty enjoyable. Now in terms of the gameplay, there's pretty much 2 sides to the gameplay. One side is that you'll be wandering around Zimending, kind of like in Yakuza, how you kind of walk around Kamurocho. It's kind of the same concept. You pretty much go around, there's side quests to do, and there's also, you can visit eateries and stuff like that, as well as building your relationship with the 3 guardians that you do dungeon crawling with. The town section for Dusk in terms of gameplay isn't anything too crazy. The side missions aren't really anything too crazy either. There's about 30 in total, I believe, and really the reason to complete them is you sometimes get like a costume or something like that, and as well you level up your limit break so you can get more levels to your limit break. Other than that, eating at the eateries just gives you, they give you status effects that you can use in the dungeon crawling part. There's also a bit of gacha in the overworld. You can kind of collect like costumes and artwork and shit like that. It is surprisingly fair because it will literally only give you shit that you don't have, so that's pretty neat. As well, in the overworld you can build your relationship with the guardian gods that you play through without the dungeons. All that really does for you is give you more move sets in the dungeons. It's worth doing. I maxed out all my relationships with the 3 guardian gods, as well as doing all these side quests. I did not collect all the shards in the game or all the stickers, artwork, all that shit, because that would have taken a while. Other than that, the overworld part is still pretty alright. I liked walking around with Zimending. I hope they do it better in the second game though. I hope they add more activities to the overworld, because other than that, Zimending kind of feels like a hollow Kamurocho. Like there just isn't that much to do in the world, so I hope in Dusk Diver 2 they add more to do in the world. Now in terms of dungeon crawling, this is going to be pretty much the meat and potatoes of the game, and really it plays more like a Warriors type of game, beat 'em up type of game, where you just kind of beat through waves through the dungeons. And the unique part of it is that you can summon the guardian gods to up your combos, kind of like a Persona or maybe a Stand in JoJo. Otherwise, the dungeon crawling in combat really isn't anything too crazy, to be honest. It's nothing that I haven't experienced in the past for like a Warriors type of game or something maybe akin to Yakuza. I wouldn't really compare the combat to Yakuza. I'd say it's closer to Warriors since they have like waves of characters coming at you at a time. Nonetheless, the combat is pretty satisfying. I enjoy just beating through waves of characters, and when you summon one of the guardian gods to up the combos, it can be really satisfying, especially with Viata, who can like has firearms. When you summon during a combo, she'll just absolutely wreck house. Leo does as well. He's more of like a brute character rather than a ranger, but overall the combat is pretty fun. It does have a limit break. I didn't really use it all that much, but it is pretty satisfying to beat someone up while you're in limit break. The only other thing to really mention about dungeons that you have to collect something called shards to enter dungeons. The game has somewhere in the realm of about 180. You only need 50 to beat the game though, and it is incredibly fair with how many it gives out, so getting enough shards to progress through the game isn't even an issue because it gives you enough to progress very easily. I had about 100 by the time I beat the game, but like I said, you only need 50 to beat the game. As well, another thing to mention about the dungeon crawling is at points they attempt to introduce platforming. The platforming is the only thing I can really complain about because it is not really all that good. You can't control Yumo really all that well, so when you're doing platformings, I fucked it up several times and it's kind of annoying. If they do platforming in Dusk Diver 2, I hope they implement it a bit better, but just know that in the dungeon crawling there is some instances of platforming. Other than that, the only thing I can really complain about is the fact that I wish you could mid-air dash. I feel like that'd be more satisfying. Either that, or if not mid-air dashing, double jumping I feel like would have made traversing the dungeons a lot more convenient. But in terms of the gameplay, the overworld and worming around Zimending kind of feels like a hollow Yakuza. I get it because it's more of an indie game. I just hope in the second game they do more with it. And the dungeon dungeon crawling is pretty fun, honestly. It's just a simple kind of beat 'em up type of game, but it's fun enough and I enjoyed it nonetheless. Only other thing to really mention is you don't really level up in the game. You just gain skill points that you can use to put towards attributes. It has kind of just a basic leveling up system. Some people might find a problem with that. As I understand, in Dusk Diver 2 they go to a more traditional level up system, but overall my opinion on Dusk Diver is I really enjoyed it. It was actually a surprise banger for what it was. I was not expecting this game to be as good as it was, and I was kind of surprised. It was nicely short. It didn't overstay its welcome. It was only around 20 hours, even considering I did more. You can easily do it under 20 hours. I've seen people, I think, do it in like 10 to 15, so it's very doable to have this game be a short experience. With that short experience, though, I would say it's probably more worth it to pick up on a discount. I've seen it go on sale on the Switch for like $3, and it is absolutely worth it at that price. So if you're interested in something that's kind of like an anime style Yakuza, I would definitely recommend checking this game out. It's a lot of fun, honestly. I think you'll be surprised. It's a really just underrated game, kind of, because I never see people talking about this game, and it's really enjoyable. I hope that Dusk Diver 2 can hold up. We'll have to see. I'm gonna take a break because I don't want to jump right into Dusk Diver 2 after playing Dusk Diver, but I'll eventually get around to playing this game, and hopefully I will enjoy it as well. But if you see this game on discount, or if you see the physical edition on Switch, which is kind of rare, I would recommend picking it up. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.